Welcome back to your passion, purpose, and personal brand. I'm your host, Lisa McGuire, and today we're going to talk about something at the heart of every great leader's journey, and that is the courage of our voice. My guest today is Dr. DeRetta Rhodes, Executive Vice President and Chief Culture Officer for the Atlanta Braves. And if you've not heard of them, then I don't know where you've been. They're a Major League Baseball team. She oversees people, capital, communications, investor relations, and community engagement for one of the most visible organizations in the country. She's also the author of Courage of Voice, Empowering Women to Open Professional Doors, a book that explores how to find and use your voice in spaces that aren't always ready to hear it. And in our conversation, we're going to explore how culture drives performance and belonging, why leaders need to shift from performance to presence, and what it looks like to create environments where people feel safe, seen, and supported to thrive. I'm sure we're in for a dynamic conversation that's going to challenge the way you think about leadership, culture, and your own voice. So, DeRetta, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It is such a pleasure to be here with you. And I will tell you, all of the things that you just mentioned is something that is a passion point for me. And I think about it from the early parts of my career until now. And so I'm just so excited to be here and talk to you about this.
Well, it is a perfect match because the show is your passion, purpose, and personal brand. So it's a great uniting point. And we'll start with the first thing I want to ask you is you've been really candid about growing up with the pressure to do more. Mm-hmm. How did those experiences shape your leadership and where you are today?
That's such a great question because I think about the fact that oftentimes I was told that I wouldn't perform or that I'm not performing or I wasn't going to make it in spaces that I wanted to be in. And I think for me, it really resonated around the fact that, okay, I have to show up and I have to perform. I have to do these things. I have to excel in these areas. I think a lot of times, though, we add our own pressures to ourselves in terms of expectations that people have versus expectations that you have of yourself. And so I think growing up, my parents were educators. My grandmother was an educator. And so as you can imagine, the understanding around education and how you needed to perform was very critical. And I think because of those pieces and the things that I remember my grandmother and my parents saying around how I needed to do well in academics and what that meant and what I needed to do to perform, because when I was growing up, I debated competitively. And so what that meant when I had to do those things and even remembering my debate coach telling me how I needed to be prepared and how I needed to make sure that I showed up in such a way that I was using and communicating in a very meaningful way. And so I think what that did is that just made me probably, which this is not good, is try to be a perfectionist around things, which is not normal. You can't do that. You have to really give yourself grace. But I think it also really spoke to me around the fact that how as a leader, I need to learn how to give grace to others. I need to make sure that people are walking in the spaces that they're comfortable, that they can perform, but they don't feel like that they're under this pressure to do that. When you have people that are walking in their skills, they just automatically do that. And you just have to nurture and motivate. And so I think for me, because I did create those pressures for myself based on what I was told, I've really tried to be a leader that doesn't start that way and let people actually be able to be comfortable in the way that they perform and then let them thrive from that perspective.
Well, that's a great place to be in the position that you have. But I think a lot of what I heard in your story, DeRetta, is this idea of you should be doing this. You must be doing this. The shoulda, woulda, couldas, right? Yeah. That we end up bringing in as stories that puts more pressure on ourselves.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think about it so interesting. So I've gone through this academic journey. So I got my undergrad, I went back and got my MBA. And when I made the decision to go back and get my doctorate, I would explain to people, I didn't do that so you could call me Dr. Rhodes. That was not why I did that. For me, in the back of my mind, I felt like it gave me credibility at tables that I sat at. And so that was the reason why I did it. But I also think about the pressure of going through that because that was probably a very pressurized type of situation. And I'll never forget my mother saying to me at graduation, she said, you know, that's a terminal degree. You don't have to get another one. And so I think that was her way of saying to me, you've done enough. And a lot of times I think we often feel like I haven't done enough. So let me do this because that wasn't enough. And let me do this because that wasn't enough. And I really want people to start thinking about the fact that you are enough and what you're doing is enough and be okay with that. Because I think I created more angst and anxiety for myself because I was running down that particular track and had to really rethink that. And I try really hard with people that I have the opportunity to lead to not have them be in that particular space, to know that you're enough and let's focus on these things and what is it that I can help to make you expand your growth and for you to develop. That's what becomes very important to me, whether you report to me or whether I have an opportunity to engage with you from a mentoring standpoint, or if I get to be a sponsor. Those are the things that are very important to me and critical for me for individuals at this point.
Yes. And I think there's so much of a feeling of we need to prove ourselves.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Have that space is really just very inviting.
It is, because it takes that layer of pressure off for you to be able to just walk in the space with which you operate and feel comfortable in that. And I have to say, Lisa, I do a great job of it still? No, I don't. I think I coach it better than I do it. You know, it's that whole concept of Dr. Heal Thyself. And so I'm great at coaching people around how you need to do that because I don't want people to experience the angst that I oftentimes feel like I created for myself. And some of it came out of talk tracks of what people said to me that weren't necessarily as supportive as others. And it's interesting to me how we hold on to all of those negative perspectives as opposed to the positive ones. And 9 times out of 10, the positive ones are more than the negative ones. And we just hold on to those like a blanket. And so I think I've thought through that too. And that's some of what I try to make sure I infuse as well, that you're going to get feedback that you want to make sure you can objectively look at and understand and then apply it where it makes sense for you to apply.
Yeah, that does make sense. So we're going to move into talking a little bit about your book, Courage of Voice.
Yes.
We talk about, you talk about moments where your voice wasn't always welcomed.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did it take for you to keep speaking anyway, when your voice may not have, you felt that your voice was welcomed?
Great question. And I think it ended up being different things that kind of bit at me and just kind of took pieces away from me. Mm-hmm. That at one point, you know, you can't take any more pieces away. You've got to start building back. I have one specific thing that I always remind myself of, and this one was one that was a pivot point for me. It was when I was working on a project, and I was in a room with all of the leaders that were in the room, and we had gotten a new acquisition, and the conversation was around who could come to start working on this project. At the time, I had a newborn and a 2-year-old. And my leader that was over the project, he said to me, "Oh, DeRetta, you don't have any children, so I'm sure you can come." So I said I could come, and I never responded to the fact that I had children. And I kept that to myself, and they never knew. I mean, I did all the mechanizations that we as moms and dads have to do to make sure that they were okay while I traveled. But there was something that resonated and just kind of stuck with me, the fact that I didn't announce the fact that I did have children and that I could, sons, and that I could do the project anyway. And I remember at that very moment how that made me feel. And so now, or even after that, probably some weeks after that, I did go back to the leader and said, I do have children. I was able to do the project. But in the future, I'd like for us to think of individuals having the opportunity to do projects regardless of what their family situations are, because we don't want to discount individuals because of that. And I think, Lisa, for me, at that point, I will tell you, it became kind of seed for me that began to grow more and more when I started thinking about my voice, because I didn't start out feeling being courageous and let me say these things in the room, but it started out as a seed. And it was a seed that grew to when I now sit in rooms that not only do I speak for myself, but I speak for others that may not have the voice in the room. But that was what started it. And I think as those type of things began to occur, I would say more and more, I would feel more comfortable with my voice, but I didn't start out that way. And I think that that particular situation was so pivotal for me in making decisions as I moved forward in terms of how you use your voice at the time that you use it.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things you need to think about saying, not only for myself, but for others? And so it became more of I have to say to you, a mantle for me. These are the things I really need to make sure that I'm doing, not only for myself. I mean, I did an injustice to my sons. Why wouldn't I have announced that I have children in this room? And the fact that hopefully it would give others to have the courage to say the same thing, whether you're a mom or a dad. And so I think for me, that was the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the seed for me that I had to make sure that it grew in a very positive, impactful way in terms of how I think about voice and how I use my voice.
You know what hits me about that story, DeRetta, is when you were in the midst of it, you did not speak up. Yet you knew all of the organization that would take place behind the scenes. And if you did not speak up, and that was the reason why you were granted that position, that role,
Right.
then they would think that going forward, like you would have to face that discomfort again over and over.
Yeah.
So I can imagine just the tension you felt during that time.
Oh yeah, and it's one of those internal tensions, right? It's one of those things that rubs at you constantly as you're thinking through things. And I'm looking around the room and not wanting to speak up and say anything, and then I'm thinking, and it's so funny. So some time after that, there's some leaders that I got to know very well, and I would have conversations with them about my sons. They'd be like, "Oh my goodness, you have children. Why didn't you say anything when we were in that room before?" And so it became this ongoing thing around the fact that, okay, I'm constantly reminded that I needed to say something, because not only did I need to say it for me, I needed to say it for others that were already in the room. And so I think that's something, again, it just doesn't happen overnight. Like, it wasn't like that light bulb came on the next day after I didn't say anything. Like, it took some time for me to really think through it. And of course we go through it. I feel like oftentimes we test it. So when you fail that test, it's going to come back up again. So you're tested again on that particular situation. And I was like, I'm not going to fail this time. And so now that's how I've thought of things. And even now for me, not only do I try to speak up for people, but I try to put things in places and spaces that are questions that we need to start asking before someone has to say something. Giving space again to have the conversation, to have the dialogue that needs to happen. And so, again, that started for me as a seed and has grown into other things that I have really tried to ensure I focus on, having the opportunity to lead and having the opportunity to influence as well.
You know, one thing sitting in this seat, interviewing leaders that I do, and you've just proven it here, is I often see people have a defining moment that you may not realize it at that time. But like you said, if you don't address it then, it's going to come back in another way.
Right.
And you've taken that and now become an advocate for others.
Yeah.
Be able to bring this kind of movement or idea into the world.
Yeah. And you know what? Now that you say it like that, at least I didn't think of it like that. I've just thought about it as, what are the things that I know that I can do to influence and impact in that space? And what I'm hoping it helps individuals do is it gives sight. It gives you sight to the things that you now can feel like you can have the courage to say the things you need to say and want to say for others. So not only do you do it for yourself, again, like I mentioned, you become an advocate for others.
Mhm.
Because I think that's so critical in terms of as a leader and what you're doing. Because ideally, as a leader, what you are, I think, and you are ordained to do, I guess is the best way for me to say it, is you're responsible for ensuring that you're lifting and developing and ensuring that people are getting to their best optimal performance, their best optimal motivation. Because why do what people want to come to work? You want to come to work because you want to do good work. And what does that look like? And making sure that you're infusing that within the organization as a leader and as you're impacting people on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I think this leads us really well into the next question that I have. So, for leaders who are listening, who feel this tension between performance and
Yes.
presence, how do you define the difference?
Oh my. So, that's a remarkable question, because a lot of times I think we as leaders can get we can get very bogged down into task list, making sure that you're getting things done, the whole technicality of being in a function or in a role. And I think what happens is if that's your focus and you don't spend the time to talk about how you're thinking as a leader, the decisions that you're making, bringing people along, because that's oftentimes what people need the encouragement from. It's not getting through a task list. Don't get me wrong. That's great, because that's a form of achievement, right? I've achieved that list for the day. But when you start thinking of how do you then transform individuals, it is around the presence that you provide them. I have a practice of doing one-on-ones with my leaders, my direct reports, and then I do skip level meetings with everyone that's in my departments. And it is just an opportunity for them to just sit and talk to me. There's no agenda. I'm not driving the agenda. It is just space and time for us to be able to connect. And a lot of times you learn a lot of things within that space. You learn how people are really feeling about the work that's happening. You learn where they feel they are thriving somewhere. You learn if they're dealing with other things that are coming in that are impacting them both personally and professionally. And I think that's where presence becomes so critical. So when you're doing those one-on-ones, you don't have your phone on, you're not looking at your emails, you are focused on that individual and you're giving them that time and that space. And I think that for me, I think about how I had really good leaders and how I had really bad leaders. And when I think about my really good leaders, it wasn't just about teaching me functionally about doing my job. It was also about teaching me about being a leader, understanding how do you motivate individuals, how I motivate myself. All of those things become so critically important when you think about the impact of leadership. I consider being a leader, it is a privilege. It is an honor to have that opportunity to do that. And I never want to walk away saying, oh, this is what I get to do. No, this is what I've been gifted to do. And so that becomes very important to me, because you just can't, in my mind, become a leader because you have the title. It is around how do you impact and influence not only the organization, but the people, and moving them forward in a very positive way.
I love the difference in that word, I get to do or I'm gifted to do. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. I'm going to use that again.
Absolutely.
I'll use that again. All right. Well, we're going to move into your role with the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah.
And I do want to give you the opportunity. The Atlanta Braves organization is not what we just see on the baseball field. It is much more than that. And as the Chief Culture Officer of that organization, you've expanded your role beyond HR to communications and community.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us a little bit about who the Atlanta Braves are and
Sure.
why is that integration so critical?
So thank you for asking. And just this latter summer, it's now people. So now Chief People and Culture
Okay.
Officer.
All right.
So it's funny you ask that. A lot of times people only see what they see on the field.
Mhm.
And the amazing thing about the Atlanta Braves, and I have to take you kind of my origin story of how I even
Sure.
got there. So I actually worked for Turner Broadcasting. And when I started at Turner Broadcasting, I was a director supporting our finance and accounting function. At the time, the Atlanta Braves had been purchased by Liberty Media. But as transactions and as mergers and acquisitions go, there was still a transition period. And I had the opportunity to engage with a lot of that leadership team before they left the actual time, before they left Turner Broadcasting family.
Mhm.
And I kind of knew them. So back in 2008. So we'll just leave that there for a moment. So the interesting thing about the Atlanta Braves, and I now am finishing up my 7th season. I will start my 8th season in January, February, March timeframe. And the thing is that it's not just the Atlanta Braves and what you see on the field. We have created also a real estate development arm, which is called the Battery Atlanta. So we have that as well. So not only do we look at coming to a game, but we want you to have a full experience. So you can work, live, play at what we've created. And that has been absolutely amazing. Having said that, we also were part of Liberty Media and were recently spun off in the last 18 to 20 months. And we are a publicly traded organization. That looks very different than most, what you see for most franchises of sports teams. And so we're an enterprise that is hopefully impacting people and lives in a very meaningful way. I absolutely am excited about being part of the Atlanta Braves Foundation and the body of work that we do there. We are very focused on initiatives that are around youth sports. We are very focused in our community. When there is ever any type of crisis or tragedy, we try to make sure that we come in and we support a hand from that standpoint. We are very, very connected with our veterans, and we do a lot of programming for our veterans and initiatives around our veterans. And we also love our teachers. So we do a lot of focus with our teachers. But I would also be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that we have the Henry Louis Aaron Fund, and that's another one that's a legacy for us, for Hank Aaron, and the body of work that what he did not only on the field but off the field as a leader. And so all of those things culminate in just not a baseball team. It is all the things that we try to make sure that we're doing for people in community, how we also want to make sure we're supporting our investors in a very meaningful way, and making sure people are connected with us as we talk about the battery development and the fact that we want people to come and live, work, and play within our environment.
I am so glad I asked that question because there were so many things in there that I had heard bits and pieces of, I was aware of, but that is so phenomenal that you get to do all of those. Let me say it this way, that you are gifted to
Yes.
do all of
Yeah.
those things and work in those areas, DeRetta. That is absolutely amazing. So, as we look at culture, how do you
Yes.
go about measuring whether culture is working? And I'm not talking about just for staff, but for fans, for community, for partners, all of those people you talked about. How do you measure whether it's working or not?
So great question. I think you can speak to it if you want to talk about just quantitative numbers, because they're quantitative numbers that speak to, like, if we talk about our ticket sales, if we talk about what our ratings are on TV, people want to come and hear about us. If we talk about our traffic to our ballpark and to the battery development, that's another hard metric that we look at and that we consider and that we talk about. Even when you talk about people, we look at our retention numbers. We understand exit interview data that we get, although a lag metric, but we also look at that to ensure that we're getting the information. And again, that's speaking just on the quantitative pieces of, so we're able to track all of the things that we're doing. I think when you start talking about the qualitative part, because I think you have to marry them when you're talking about culture. My definition for culture always is about the feel that you have when you're part of an organization or part of something. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an organization. It is whatever you're part of. Everything has a culture that is assigned to it. And so it is ensuring that individuals feel welcomed when they come to the ballpark, whether if you're a fan, whether you are a staff member, whether you are a corporate partner, whether you are a vendor, whether you are a community partner with us. It is so fascinating how often I have people say, I work for the Atlanta Braves, and everyone, almost to a person, can cite for me the experience they've had either growing up as a child, either watching their grandparents watch us as children, or being that grandparent talking about it and the experience of what it made them feel. And it's all walks of life. Like everyone has, at least for me, has had a very positive story about how the Braves made them feel. And when you talk about how you feel, it's about, and to me, it's like that really butterfly feeling you have in your stomach, and you feel welcomed and you want to be there. It's someone opening up their home and making you feel like you're a part. So again, we definitely do the quantitative, the metrics. We take a look at that, but we also measure those other pieces. We do engagement surveys with both our fans and with our staff, trying to make sure we know and what are the things we need to focus on. No one's perfect. We have opportunities in various different areas, but we never take our eye off of that, and knowing that that gives us more insight and intel on the things that we want to make sure people feel like they feel when they leave the ballpark, and that it has been an experience that they want to share with their family and friends and so forth and so on.
When you were talking about the memory of going to the ballpark, I don't know why, but in the back of my mind, I heard the stadium organist playing just the chorus of that. I don't know why that came in, but
take me out to the ballpark.
Yeah, the seventh inning stretch, all of those things. Like, I don't know, that music just came in, or the crowd, and having been able to attend, some playoff games and things such as that. Like, there's just such a vibrancy to that. But yeah, that experience is really important, and I think for employees too, how they feel. So that brings me back to voice, right?
Yes,
so can you give me an example of maybe an illustration of how voice and culture could intersect inside an organization?
Absolutely. I think, to me, that when you speak of culture, the foundation is the voices of individuals that are a part of that organization. We would be remiss if we don't spend and take the time to understand people's perspective. And I will tell you, when I worked for Turner Broadcasting, one of the things that I thought was brilliant that CNN would do these like conversations. Then that's what they called it. They were conversations, and anybody could come at any parts of the organization, and they put a topic out there, and it could be any topic. And they brought people in, and this is how they made decisions on how they were doing featured stories. This is how they made decisions on the news that they wanted to capture within the community or within the world. And it was brilliant from the standpoint that people had the opportunity to just come and just speak about their perspective and why they thought something was important. I think when you start talking about culture, it incites what people feel that their value is. So if you have an opportunity to incite their value and it is aligned with the organization, it becomes a great culmination of what voice gives to culture. And so when we're able to start talking about it from that standpoint and not be afraid of people's perspective, because you're not going to necessarily agree, but understand if you can bring things together and have conversations and dialogue. And it's not around, Lisa, somebody's right or somebody's wrong. It is somebody's perspective. And being able to do that in a very collaborative and comfortable environment, that to me makes a difference of how voice informs culture.
Yeah, that's really rich. And I'm thinking just the ability for someone to feel heard.
Yes.
Not even, agreed with, but my voice was heard. My voice was respected. What I do here matters. And it doesn't matter what my role. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, DeRetta, we met a few weeks ago just for a
Yeah.
get to know you conversation. And one thing I was fascinated by is when you said you wrote your book,
Yes.
you didn't tell anybody about your book until just before it launched. And I'm in the middle of writing a book right now. And
Yes.
I talked to my book coach the other day and he said, you need to start talking about it a year before it's published. And I'm thinking, okay, DeRetta didn't do that, right? Okay, so here we go. So what does that reveal about your relationship with visibility when you didn't even tell anybody that you had this book?
So this is what I'll say to you. And one of the things of why, I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but
Right,
one of the
that's fine.
reasons why I didn't. So I too had a book coach, an author coach. She was absolutely amazing. And she was my go-to that I could go to. And my husband knew that I was
Okay.
writing it too. So I did have two people.
Okay.
I had kind of floated it out there, but my fear of making this proclamation that I was writing a book is that if I didn't finish it, how would I be viewed? Like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, now I have failed something. So it goes back to the beginning of the conversation that you and I had about in the back of my mind, I've had all of these records that play. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't tell somebody because if I don't do it, they're going to be like, where's your book? And so that was the reason why I did that. I do believe that there's something to be said to have somebody that is your accountability person
Mm-hmm.
that helps and supports you through that, because writing a book is a huge endeavor. Like, it's when I started going down the path, and mind you, it took me 10 years to finish it. There were lots of starts and stops, but once I got a publisher, once I got my coach, I actually got it done. And I think that accountability helped support me getting it finished. But in that 10 years of starts and stops, I was like, oh goodness, I can't tell somebody that, from the date of when I said this 10 years ago to now. Oh no. And so that was the reason why and the other thing I will tell you that's really interesting and that resonated with me is I was going through these starts and stops and I was like, oh, I want to write this and I want to do this. I ended up finding a publisher through another very good friend and colleague of mine who published through the same publisher. So I met with the publisher and I was excited about talking to her. And finally I said to her, why would somebody want to read my book? Like, let me get out of my head about this because, why? I don't have that type of ego. Why would somebody want to do it? And she said to me, because your story is not your own. And when she said that to me, that resonated with me. Like that resonated from the standpoint that we have these rich and very important things and stories to tell. And that's what the book does. And individuals can have an opportunity to say, it's not just me. I'm not by myself. I'm not out here alone. And that, I think, helped me really focus on getting it finished and getting it done when she told me that. And so that was helpful in that process. But you're right. I did not tell anybody.
Yeah.
Until I know that it was at the press and being printed.
No, I totally get that. I totally get that. But I also love, like, when you said that about that person, like, it's not your story. That just gave me chills because I know there's a lot of reasons why people write a book, right? They want to write a book because maybe they want their life to have mattered and this is their legacy they're leaving. But I think for your book, when you're like the courage of voice, right? Like, many people, especially women, struggle with being seen.
Yes.
And I think women leaders maybe want to be more visible, but they fear that either they're going to be labeled too much or not enough.
Yeah.
So, what are some practices that you could maybe help some of those women going through that thought process that they could hear from you?
Oh, absolutely. I think the one thing that is so critically important to understand is that your voice is important. You've got to use it. Now, what I would say to that is that you need to use it in the way that you're comfortable doing it. Lisa, there are some rooms that I sit in, even today. It's funny. I keep this book or a spiral notebook that I keep that I take notes about in all my meetings.
Mm-hmm.
But in the margin, I have comments of things that I may be thinking or that I want to say. And sometimes it's timing of using your voice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's learning how to do that as well, because there are times that I decide, and that's what I think is important for us to be able to truly think about. I am going to decide when I want to use my voice. I'm not going to have somebody else decide it for me. And if it's not in that particular meeting, at what time is it that I'm going to have the conversation? Now, I will still have the conversation, but I'm going to do it on my terms. And so I think when you start thinking of it like that and not feeling like you have to fill up a room for the sake of filling up a room, that you do it in the time that you need to do it. Or maybe you do need to fill up that room at the time that something's happening, but you get to decide that. And so I think once we get out of being concerned about using our voice, I think the other critical part is, you'll use it. Now the question is the timing of when you'll use it and being comfortable with that. I have someone, I had a leader that came to me, female leader, and she's like, oh my gosh, DeRetta, I should have said something in that meeting. And this is what I was thinking. I said, why can't you still say something? I said, and the question I have for you, who is it targeted to? So now you have an opportunity to be very intentional about what you want to talk about and what you want to say based on what you heard in that meeting. And we get that opportunity. And I think also it becomes freeing when you know that it's your choice of the timing of which you want to have those conversations.
I think that power of choice is such an important part. And it really does sound like that the part of your courage of voice is also the courage to set limits. So my follow-up question to you would be, how have you learned to protect your energy and still lead with that presence and that timing?
Oh, and you're right. And I'm going to tell you, that's a muscle you have to work on using. So you have to get to the point where you're very comfortable from that standpoint. A lot of times silence is just as powerful as words. And so when you think about that in terms of conversations that you're having or conversations that you're hearing, because again, remember, I talk a lot about influence and how do you influence? You can influence in a room. You don't have to say a word. And I think a lot of times when we start thinking about that, and I want to answer the question that you asked, because the question that you asked me was when do I use it and when do I think about it? I think for me, it became one of those things where it was practice. Because when there were moments when I was like, oh, I should have said something then. And then I was like, okay, now I can go back and say this. Now I'm more astute of, okay, this is when I'm going to say what I need to say. And this is when I'm going to decide to have it in a room that's maybe just me and this individual. But it was practice. Like it was those times where it was like those fleeting moments when I was like, why didn't I say something then? And coming back around. And now I think you become very comfortable in your own skin around how you do that. But it takes practice. Like it doesn't happen overnight. Like it is one of those things where you have to just start using that muscle on a daily basis in conversations and how you're flowing in and out of things.
Yeah, and get really familiar with yourself. It's just the reps, it sounds like.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you think about sports and people that play sports. How often do they go out and practice if they're a batter? How often do they go out and practice on their swing? Or how often does a pitcher go out and pitch? So it's the same thing when you think about that from a voice and from a leadership perspective.
Yes, yes. When we met previously, you also highlighted the power of sponsors and advocates.
Yes.
Could you maybe share a moment with us when someone's sponsorship shifted the trajectory of your career?
Absolutely. And a lot of times, I preface this by saying, a lot of times you don't even know you're being sponsored. And a lot of times you may not even know who your sponsor is. It may be somebody that's your mentor, it may be somebody that you work for, but you have no idea. This is one that completely changed the trajectory of my career. I was working at Turner Broadcasting at that particular time. I had been promoted to VP. I was supporting our technology organization. Out of the blue, our CHRO came and spoke with me. So it was our CHRO and then our EVP that was over all of the businesses that had HR, and she did communications and so forth and so on. And there was an assignment that was happening in Hong Kong. And she came to me and she said, hey, and at the time, I was a mother with teenagers, single mom. So I was a divorced mom with teenagers and a dog. And so she came to me and she said, listen, we've got an assignment in Hong Kong that we would like for you to go and stay there. So it was more of a seconded experience. It wasn't an expat because I wasn't going to be there three years or better. I was only supposed to be there for 90 days. It ended up being 6 months. So she said, I want to see if there's something that you're interested in. And I said, I would love to talk to you about it. Let me go home tonight. So I went home, talked to my parents because I needed to have them help me as I was making the decision. And my dad said, why wouldn't you do this? This is an absolutely amazing opportunity. And I had the opportunity to go work in Hong Kong for 6 months on an assignment that it truly changed my life. Like the perspective of living in a totally different country that is 12 hours ahead of the States and all of the things that you have to do and being immersed in both that role and in that country. And I actually supported the whole Asia Pac region. And so that included Singapore, Seoul, Japan, Tokyo, Australia, and then of course, Hong Kong and Bangkok as well, Thailand. And so having had that opportunity, and I'm going to say, Lisa, I don't even know how my name came up. So as the assignment was finishing up, and I got a phone call from one of the leaders that I was supporting, and he was the chief technology officer for the organization. And he said, hey, I know that your assignment's finishing up. I want to hear from you on how you thought it was. I was like, oh my gosh, it was amazing. And he said to me, his first name is Dan. I'll leave it at that. He said to me, I just want to let you know, I was the one that actually put your name for that project because of the work that you have been doing with me and my team. I felt like this was a beneficial opportunity for you. I had no idea that Dan put my name in. And I never even thought about it, Lisa, with the work that I was doing. I was just doing what I knew to do. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he thought enough of me in rooms that I was not in to bring my name up for me to have this amazing experience. And I will tell you that particular experience, it was life-changing, both personally and professionally, just because of the experience I got. And also personally living in that city and how vibrant it was and having the opportunities I've had to meet people that were around the world and doing projects with individuals that I would never have had the opportunity to do. So that was a time where sponsorship came in and I didn't even know I was being sponsored.
You know, it's so interesting as you're talking about that. I'm thinking about how much that perspective and experience probably influences how well you are gifted to do the job you're doing now, right? Like bringing in other people's perspectives and being respectful of people and how you bring it all together. What an amazing experience, DeRetta.
It was. And I just, like I said, it was absolutely life-changing. And it was a person that brought my name up in a room when they decided that they were making assignments for that project.
And another thing that takes me back to is what we are gifted to do versus get to do. People are watching. Yes. People are watching.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So for the audience, if you could give a piece of advice to someone who feels unheard at work, what would you say? I would have them. The first thing that I would say is that really process the things that you want to be heard. What are the things that you want someone to hear you say or hear you write or whatever it is? Like I would write those things out. I would find somebody either in the organization or a mentor or someone to talk through those things and help find someone that is either a buddy in the organization or a mentor in the organization for you to walk through that. I think it's so critical for you to be able to put all of your thoughts together and have them in a way that is a message you want to give. You want to make sure that it's clear and it's succinct and you're getting across what you want to have heard.
And I think you start there. You start putting that together, and then you bounce it off. Even if you have an accountability partner, bounce it off someone so they can hear it, hear how you're saying it, hear how you're discussing it, hear how you're talking about it, and then set up that meeting and have that conversation. As hard as it is, I mean, and I will tell you, one of the hardest conversations I know I've ever had, and still to this day, is talking to someone about my compensation. And me having my value of what I think of the body of work I do and how it equates to how I'm being paid. That is the most difficult conversation to ever have. And I will tell you, still to this day, it's hard for me to have that conversation. However, it is really critical for you to be able to write down all of those points, be ready to be countered, and to have the conversation, because the moment you've had it, you've released that. Yeah. Whatever that person does with that information, you can't be worried about that. You've released that, and you're able to walk in how you feel about the fact that I cared and valued enough about myself to be able to have this conversation.
And what I love about that insight is to go into this thinking, being strategic about it, not when you get in a situation where emotions come in and you can't get your words out and you walk out with a very different outcome, right? Right. Like you've been thoughtful and very, very intentional about communicating what needed to be communicated in the way that you wanted to be heard. So
yes,
I love that. I love that.
Yes. Yes.
And I know we have a lot of senior level executives or, people who are owners of companies. What's a step they could take maybe this week to create a culture where voices can really thrive?
I would recommend they start doing one-on-ones and they start having conversations with people they typically would not have one-on-ones with, and let them come in and just talk to you. Don't give them an agenda. Don't give them a topic. You give them an opportunity for you to be able to just hear them. And you can decide where you want to do that in an organization. And trust me, people will find out you're doing those. And a lot of times what you can do is take nuggets of what you've heard and you can parrot it back in a town hall or parrot it back in a leadership team meeting. But just start listening to people. And that'll make a huge difference where people feel like they're being heard.
I can imagine. Yeah, very powerful of doing that. Well, DeRetta, you've provided so much value here today, given me more courage to speak up and be intentional about things. So what's the best way? Where could people find you if they'd like to reach out?
Oh, I love that question. Please look me up on LinkedIn. I am out on LinkedIn, and it's DeRetta Rhodes, and you'll be able to find me with the Atlanta Braves. I would love to connect with individuals. I always try to make sure that if you reach out to me, I'm going to respond back, but I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your own voices, stories, so that we can start, as I love what you said earlier, that it's a movement. And so we can start creating a movement for people with their voice.
That's an amazing place to end. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So for our listeners, I loved how DeRetta reminded us that the courage of voice is not just about speaking up. It's about creating cultures where others feel safe to do the same. And if today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to check out her book, Courage of Voice, Empowering Women to Open Professional Doors. You can also connect with her, as she said, on LinkedIn, and we'll put all that information in the show notes for you. And as always, thank you for joining me on Your Passion, Purpose, and Personal Brand. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and let's keep spreading that message that authentic leadership and human-centered culture are real competitive advantages. So until next time, remember your voice matters. Use it with courage to express your passion. It will lead to revealing your purpose as you travel on the journey to your legendary self. We'll see you here next week.